So this week we're transitioning out of literary month or lit month, aka September, and moving on into just more, the unstructured content that I've been kind of doing since August. And to kind of ease the transition, we're going to talk about problematic literature and art as, you know, more, as a kind of easing into kind of point. So, and sorry if things kind of jump around a bit. Still kind of fighting a cough, so I'll be trying to pause the recording when I have to cough to try and keep from coughing on camera. um, but so and so we're gonna start with what I kind of one thing I kind of agree with, you know, evangelicals on even now, but not like that the fact that there is problematic books and art. But as the saying goes, the devil is in the details. And see what a evangelical Christian would call problematic would be, anything that blaspheme, basically anything that goes against their strict interpretation of religion. Heavy fantasy elements. There are those who even go as far to call the Chronicles of Narnia problematic, even though it's the most allegorical allegory to allegory since Pilgrim's freaking Progress. Anything that anything that would get more than a PG rating, and then some even things that would get above a G rating are viewed as problematic by certain more fundamentalist, more extreme sects of Christianity. And of course, since we're talking about problematic literature, I figured I'd wear one of my Deadpool shirts because, if you noticed, I do kind of try and, I do try and theme my attire a little bit with the video, which is kind of one of the reasons why I moved to this new angle from the older videos that were basically just my head. But so anyways, we've already kind of gone through what an evangelical might find problematic over the kind of course of this channel. What with all the talk about the culture of censorship that fundamentalist evangelicals like to subject their children to. But why would I say that there is problematic literature and art? Now, it's undeniable that there are novels and there are pieces of art that are, seen as controversial, even without, evangelicals stirring up a fuss because it doesn't gel with their worldview. And the fact that a piece of art or literature doesn't gel with the current moral structure is what I'm is how I'm defining problematic. Now, do I have the, what, now, the way I see it, no matter how problematic a piece of literature or art is, for the most part, it still has some value. To dive straight on into Godwin's Law, I'm gonna just go for Godwin's Law and say that even Mein Kampf has some value in at least a historical sense. We can look at it and see, okay, that's what this guy was thinking. This is how Hitler saw the world. That is essentially the value of Mein Kampf. But even, more benign works can be very problematic to modern secular sensibilities. For instance, if you like the pulp, the kind of pulpy genre, I say, go ahead and read Edgar Rice Burroughs, but it's problematic because you're gonna have to ignore a bunch, or you're gonna have to be aware that there's going to be a whole heaping barrel of casual Victorian racism throughout whatever Edgar Rice Burroughs writes, because it was written by an American in the 19th century, in the 1800s. It's loaded with casual Victorian racism. And even the works of Mark Twain, specifically Huckleberry Finn, are viewed as problematic because of the use of a certain word, because it's written from the perspective of an uneducated white boy in the American South. And I'd argue that, and I understand that mentioning Huckleberry Finn will get me in trouble with certain people. But you can argue that the narrative arc of Huckleberry Finn is learning not to be as racist as he was. But, and so therein, lies what, the value, because Mark Twain was progressive for his time and area, but his time and area were pre-Civil War South. So while his writing was very progressive for its time, there are points where you can say that it hasn't aged well. And you can also look at certain elements in the works of Shakespeare and potentially call them problematic. Like, for instance, in Twelfth Night, how Antonio gets completely screwed over, and how he's portrayed as having a rather... It's very subtextual, but he does have... he's a secondary character who does have a same-gender crush on another character. It's very subtextual, but it's there. It can be argued that it's there. And also the fact that a lot of Shakespeare's comedy, especially in Twelfth Night and in Two Gentlemen of Verona, is gleaned from the, the trope of cross-dressing. Where a female character will pretend to be a male character, or a male character will pretend to be a female for a time. Though, from what I've read, the joke isn't really, hey, look, it's a person who's cross-dressing, isn't that funny? It's more like it's more of character A pretends to be gender B, shenanigans ensue. Like, once again, going to Twelfth Night, one of the main characters is a female who's pretending to be a male, and she is talking with this duke, and they're describing who they want, who they'd love to be with. And they're describing each other, but but pronouns end up getting flipped because the female has to pretend to be a heterosexual male. And of course, you could also argue that it's more of a meta joke because back in Shakespeare's time, women weren't allowed to be actors. It was seen as beneath them. So you've got a young prepubescent male who's playing a female character who's pretending to be a male. But once again, I can see why people would take issue with such, themes and tropes in our modern day. And sorry, didn't really get it paused in time, but so you have, tropes and writing style and stereotypes that do not age well and thus don't gel with our modern sensibilities and are problematic. And then you have the Heinlein problem. And before I go into what I call the Heinlein problem, I'll be frank, I'm a big fan of Robert Heinlein, but I have to be in the mood for a Robert Heinlein book to read a Robert Heinlein book. Because his stuff, while engaging and once again very, very pulpy, it's, good pulpy sci-fi action. Robert Heinlein has issues. For instance, Starship Troopers. When you read the text, it is very fascistic. And one of the only ways that you can kind of get through it is to take it as satire because of the 1990 movie, which shot it as a satire. But it's written very, very straight, and it's, service guarantee citizenship is not a joke in the novel. It's how it is. And then there's The Door into Summer, where we have the hero gets scammed out of his business and put into cryogenic sleep, wakes up in the future, and discovers he has a lot of money from this other company that he supposedly also founded. Well, it turns out that he manages to find a way to go back in time, starts this other company, gets put into cryogenic sleep to fix how his business partners screwed him over. And that's all well and good. It's a pretty interesting, time travel-y story. Except when it gets to the part where it ends with him meeting his niece in the future after they've both been in cryogenic sleep. His niece that he had seen as practically a daughter. And it's, oh goody, we can make love to each other because now we're the same age because cryogenic sleep shenanigans. Yeah. That's what I mean about the Heinlein problem, is when you have an author who puts things like that into their work. Now, should such things be censored? No. I will argue against censorship. And once again, because if we do decide to, censor problematic materials, where do we draw the lines? Because wherever we draw the lines, someone will go and say, oh, this meets the criteria, but they're not really suggesting it to be censored or banned because it actually meets the criteria. They'll be doing it because the book disagrees with their worldview. And we see that already happening with evangelicals using things like crass language and sexual scenes to try and quash literature that disagrees with their worldview. Like I mentioned last week with The Handmaid's Tale, even though there are a couple complaints, suggesting it be censored because it is anti-Christian, big air quotes. Though I will say that, yes, it is very, this is what happens when you get when you get this kind of mindset running the country. So it is anti a form of Christianity because it's saying it's holding up a mirror to the, to how, how Abrahamic faiths treat women because they base their lives and morals off a Bronze Age book. But a majority of the complaints against The Handmaid's Tale were actually for language and sex scenes. So you'll have people, if you use criteria to say this should be censored, you'll have people trying to push their own agenda using using this censorship system. Now, what I'd suggest is something possibly like the MPAA rating system. Yeah, there are still R-rated movies. There are still R-rated movies. There are still PG-13 movies. There are PG movies. There are G movies. Basically put, on the cover of a book, a little, in a little asterisk, saying, contains, contain such problematic elements. Read at your own discretion. And perhaps that may help things, that may not help things. I'm open to other suggestions about what we do. How do we preserve how do we preserve literary heritage while still keeping in with our modern sensibilities? It can also be as simple as this was a product of its time, so there will be casual racism, But we're about out of time. Feel free to comment any suggestions about what you'd say we should do with problematic literature. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube things, and remember, indoctrination is a hell of a drug.